So, this is the Crooked Paths podcast, and today we're going to have a conversation about Ramana Maharshi. He was a great saint in the south of India who lived from 1880 until 1950. He was 70 years old when he died. And this is
Prabhu, also from the south of India, Tamil Nadu.
Awesome. And I'm Marcelo. So, just to set it up, we just want to explain why we're talking about Ramana Maharshi. And it's just because he was such a prime example of a person who had transcended his ego. He had no ego whatsoever, really down to earth, and he had a completely universal approach to the deeper dimension of spirituality, what this life is about, and really a remarkable person. And I remember just the other day, recently reading that Gandhi, when he was shown a picture of Ramana Maharshi, he just blurted out, "What a great sage." Yeah. So, do you have anything to add to that, Prabhu?
Yeah, I think among all the gurus that the world has, or at least India has produced, as far as I know, Ramana Maharshi is one of the most significant because he did not go through a typical education, or he did not have a guru himself. He got enlightened by himself. He got enlightened, if you want to put it in another way, by the universe. He just woke up, which is a very, very phenomenal thing.
Yeah,
and very
spontaneously.
inspiring.
He woke up spontaneously as a
Inspiring.
16-year-old.
And very inspiring, especially in the modern world where we are searching for someone to give us light, someone to show us the path.
Yeah. So it was 1999 December, and I had done a 10-day meditation retreat in Kathmandu. It was the first time I had really meditated. I'd kicked myself when I thought I was a meditator before that, but no, it wasn't true at all. And I then went on to India, to Rishikesh, and I studied yoga. And at the yoga school that I was at, I was there for like 5 months, but they had a book list of recommended books. And I had been wondering, what was the Buddha like as a person? 2,600 years ago, his story had been so mythologized. He had been so mythologized. So it was like, who was the Buddha as a person? He didn't walk on water all the time. He was a regular man who lived to the age of 80. And I remember getting glimpses of what he was as a person, that he had arthritis and, stuff like that, as you can imagine, the ailments of getting older. So I found out about Ramana Maharshi in the yoga school, and when I first saw his picture, I said, oh, that's a very special guy. And then when I read the book, A Search in Secret India, written in 1935 or so by Paul Brunton, I was blown away, because when Paul Brunton, on his spiritual journey in the early 1900s, goes to India, after researching so much in England and reading so many thousands of books probably, and he in the search in Secret India, he ends up somehow going to see Ramana Maharshi. He's advised by two different people who didn't know each other, go see him. He's the one you're looking for. So he goes to see him, and he's on the way over to Tiruvannamalai, where Ramana Maharshi lived for most of his life. He didn't go anywhere after he woke up, after he got to Tiruvannamalai, for the next 56 years. And so Paul Brunton gets to Tiruvannamalai, he gets to the ashram, and when he sees Ramana Maharshi, he sits down next to him in the meditation hall, and he had these questions that he'd formulated. And Paul Brunton was a very intelligent guy, really smart guy. So you can imagine the caliber of his questions. And when he sits down in front of the Maharshi, and his mind just went very calm and quiet. And he was wondering, what is this? Is this a force that the Maharshi is emanating? Is it a spiritual fragrance that he's emanating? And at the end of 1 or 2 hours, and everyone got up to leave to go have lunch, Ramana Maharshi's attendant and Ramana Maharshi were the last ones in the room, along with Paul Brunton. And the attendant asked Paul Brunton, do you have any questions for the Maharshi? And the Maharshi didn't say anything either, by the way. He was very silent. So Paul Brunton realized that his questions were kindergarten level compared to what he had experienced. This being in the presence of a really awakened person who radiated peace and silence. So that's how I found out about Ramana Maharshi. And what about you, Prabhu? How is your story about how you found him?
I think my dad used to read books about him when he was young, and the first time I heard about him was when we moved to Chennai, which is the capital city of the state, Tamil Nadu. I was visiting from Denmark, and my dad wanted to go on a 2-day trip on a weekend to his famous or his favorite pilgrim city, which turned out to be Tiruvannamalai. But it did not go deep into my consciousness because the trip, I only have vague memories of the trip. but I came back to Copenhagen, and I think a couple of years down the line, a strange series of events, and I was searching online and Amazon for books on gurus or spiritual teachers who try to enlighten us about what the world is actually about. And I stumbled on Ramana Maharshi and Be As You Are, which turned out to be one of the most influential books on my personal spiritual journey. And ever since then, whenever I have gone back to India, I have made it a point to visit Ramana Ashram.
And how long ago was that? Was it like 6 years ago?
When I first went
when you first went with your father to the ashram?
I would say so. I would say 2010.
So, okay. All right. You brought up the book, Be As You Are, The Teachings of Sri Ramana Maharshi, edited by David Godman. This is the first book. This is the second book that I got after reading A Search in Secret India. And I've got my copy here. And it says, I got it in Rishikesh, India. Rishikesh is a place famous in India for being a yoga capital. I got it in March 2000. And the book is just flipping through the pages, full of notes and highlights and stars, and just, especially the first half of the book. If you notice that the second half also has a lot. But then on the very last page, I wrote down, it was page 216, finally finished this book on November 15th, 2005. So it took me 5.5 years to read this little book. I'm a very intelligent person, and I just could not understand what he was pointing at. I just couldn't get past certain chapters. I had to reread it again and again and again, and 5.5 years to read it.
But I must admit, the first half of the book is also very dense, because the whole structure and the way he says his, I wouldn't really call it thoughts, but he explains his views are very new. And it's like hitting into a brick wall when there is no brick wall, which is what I would think he would say as well. And then once you're used to what he's trying to explain, then the second half turns out to be a little bit more easy.
Right. And on top of that, you have to explain, for people listening to this, that he wasn't into theory. So it was not theoretical at all. There were no satsangs, there was no 1.5 hour lectures. No. Everything
he said was aimed at some specific person. There was no words which were wasted on vainglorious speeches.
Right, exactly. And just like you said, this book is a collection of, he didn't speak much at all. So people took notes of what he said, and then they collected those notes and turned them into books, and they would hand them the manuscript before it was printed, published, and he would make corrections, and then it would be published, and then he would make corrections on the first publication. It was a collection of things that he said over 20 years, and the book is only 216 pages long, and no theory. And you said you crashed into something, even though there's nothing to crash into.
Exactly.
It's the ego. You're crashing. The ego is crashing.
You cannot explain it.
You can't explain it.
Yeah.
Explain. Was there a quote that you found that would exemplify that? Because he said you don't have to do any spiritual practice to become what you already are, to become what you've always been. And so you hear that, I heard that, or I remember that. It's like, what? I don't need to meditate, I don't need to do yoga, I don't need to... what? To be what I've always have been? What's he pointing at? What's he talking about? I could tell from his example that what he was pointing at was the deepest truths. Are the deepest truths. Because his example was of a fully awakened person. And perhaps right now we should describe what happened to him when he was 16 years old.
I think,
just to put it in context for the listener.
Yeah, and I think the answer that, or rather, my reply kind of gives a quote which you also asked me like 2 minutes ago. One of his quotes which exemplifies what he thinks about, as well as your current question, which is what happened to him specifically. And this was a quote which he mentioned, or which he gave to as a reply to someone who asked him a question on the ego. And the quote goes like this: "Just as it is not necessary to kill a rope that one imagines to be a snake, so there is no need to kill the mind. Knowing the form of the mind makes the mind disappear. That which is forever non-existent is already removed."
Yeah.
Which is, going back 2 minutes ago, the brick wall which I was crashing into.
Which doesn't even exist.
Which doesn't exist.
As you said.
Which makes it harder. It's like us trying to combine with our shadows. You can never combine with the shadow. The shadow doesn't exist. And coming back to your question about his spontaneous awakening, it can also be exemplified by the simple quote where he realized that he was not the body. The ego, or rather, what is not the ego, or what is the ego, transcended the body.
Realized
the body consciousness. He lost body consciousness.
He realized he was not the body.
Yes.
Yeah, he kept saying, "You're not the body." That's the fundamental error. You think you're the body, you're not the body. And it's not an attitude like there's these other religions that have this sense of shame and guilt with the body. You know, like because of the animal nature of the body, right? It's not, he wasn't referring to that at all. He's saying you're something much grander than the body.
It's much more unifying, and in a way, it encompasses everything. I think it is very close to what in Hinduism or Buddhism they call as the Indra's net, which is signified by, so every one of us is like a jewel in like
a what?
A jewel, like a jewelry, a precious stone.
Oh, a jewel.
A jewel.
Okay.
In like a broad net. There's like millions of these, but each of these are like a precious stone which reflects everything else. So everything is a reflection of everything else. But even if you pick one out, it cannot exist by itself.
Yeah.
You are everything. You're both yourself and you're everything as well. And his way of teaching was also similar, where you are more than your body, but that does not necessarily mean either a very nihilistic view, which means you use your body for anything you want, you abuse your body, you do drugs, alcohol. That's not what I meant. Or it's not the other way around, where you're very ashamed of your body, where you say, I'm more than my body, but this body is something which I want to shed as soon as possible. His views where you are more than the body for sure, but then there are some things you do and some things you don't do, but you just take it as it is. You just accept it because it is just a body.
Yeah. And also, his teaching, like we've said numerous times, he didn't speak much, but he said quite often, "Summa iru."
Summa iru.
Summa iru. How do you say it?
Right now in colloquial Tamil, we would call it Chumma iru, but then in olden Tamil, they probably said Summa iru.
Which means what?
Which means, literally translating it, Summa means just, and iru means be. So it just means just be.
Just be.
Just be.
Just be. And it's also translated in the books as just be quiet.
Yes.
Just be silent.
Just be still.
Just be still. And Ramana Maharshi said his highest teachings happened in silence. There would be people around him completely in silence. That was his highest teachings. And he would only speak when spoken to a little bit and give a quick little answer. You know, so for the audience, I think we should describe what happened to Ramana Maharshi when he was 16 years old. This was also in 1896. Okay, like late August it happened. Do you want to tell that story, or should I tell it?
I mean, you can
Okay,
start on
we'll both tell a story, but basically what happened, Ramana Maharshi, he was a typical 16-year-old kid, did a lot of sports. He didn't care much about school. He didn't care much about his studies, but he had a photographic memory of a sort. So he didn't have to study that much to get good grades. And other classes he just didn't care about. But anyways, he said his father had died, and it was just him and his brothers and sister and mother, and they were living at their uncle's place. And so one day he's in his room and at his uncle's place, and he suddenly has this intense feeling that he was about to die. Imagine your life, you have a sense that you're about to die. Multiply it like 10 times for him. What happened to him? He was about to die. It's like, so he laid down flat on the ground, and he decided to just hold his breath and just see what happens. And he was observing the whole, and he was guided by a higher voice or a higher guidance was guiding him through this thing. And he asked himself, well, if I die, what happens to me? And he saw that his body would be taken to the funeral grounds where they would burn his body. And he thought, okay, so if they burn this body, do I die? Am I dead? And he's like, no. He realized he wasn't the body. And it was like a 20, 25, 30-minute experience. And boom, he was awakened after that, like we were talking about before, with no meditation, no yoga, no sadhana. If you looked at him, sometimes you could see he had horrible posture, so yoga wasn't necessary for becoming enlightened. But he didn't know what happened. He was only 16 years old, and he thought that he got some sort of disease. But even though it was a very pleasant feeling disease, and he would be studying, he tried to be a normal school kid after that, and he would be studying, and then he would go into a deep samadhi trance, a deep state of hyper awakenedness, where the mind is totally quiet, and he was super aware of his connection with all of existence, the deeper reality. So that's one day his older brother said, "What are you doing? Hey, you know how older brothers can be. What are you doing? You're wasting the family's money. You're being like a yogi. Why don't you go be a yogi somewhere else? And you need to study." And Ramana Maharshi realized, he's right. My older brother's right. I am being like a yogi, and I am wasting the family's money. So he took a little bit of money, and he decided right then and there to leave was it Madurai?
It was Madurai.
And how far is Madurai from Thiru?
I would say 7 hours, 7 or 8 hours.
By bus? By train?
By train.
Okay. So he decides to go by train. Just quickly, he goes by train, and he took a little bit of money, but he ran out of money, and then he just had no food, and he threw all his possessions into a tank. Tank is where a pool water is collected. And he had these little gold earrings, and he sold them for a pittance, and he just finally got to Tiruvannamalai 3 days later. Yeah, and that was the 1st of September in 1896. Easy date to remember. So he's a 16-year-old kid. Do you know about how he walks into the temple, Arunachala
and
temple?
all the doors open automatically for him. It's this feeling of having been welcomed to what would have been his real home.
Literally, the doors to the temple late at night all opened for him. They literally opened up. He walks into the temple. So it's not just an expression that Prabhu was using. The doors actually opened up.
It's not an
automatically. Yeah. And to the inner sanctum where they have the prized in the Hindu religion, the Shiva lingam for people who follow Shiva. And it was there, and he goes up to it. He had this burning feeling in his body, and he hugs the Shiva lingam, and he got a deep feeling of inner coolness. And he didn't tell that story for many years, because had the priest who were in charge of taking care of the Shiva lingam found out about it, they would have had to go through this whole elaborate, complicated cleansing ritual to purify the Shiva lingam that this young kid had soiled, by their standards, even though this kid was a Buddha level kid. And so for 2 years, he just was in a deep samadhi trance most of the time. He wasn't eating. His body was wasting away. He was like a skeleton. But some people noticed that he was like a holy child. So they would wait for him when he would wake up and shove food down his mouth. They would cut his hair. His hair got really long and matted. His fingernails were really long. There's a famous picture of him when he looks better. You know the picture I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's like 18 years old, I think, or
He's like really young,
or 20 years old.
Just after he reached through.
Oh my God! And so that's Ramana's story. And after that, he never went further than 2 kilometers away from the holy mountain that is there. It's called Arunachala. And he said that the mountain was his Sadguru, his teacher, and that the mountain drew him like a magnet, and he lived on the mountain, and he knew every square centimeter of that mountain. He had walked everywhere in that mountain. So, and you've been to that mountain, and
many times.
Yeah.
And the fact that he lived there for 50 years is quite incredible.
Yeah, quite incredible. And he was there when the mountain was barren. There was not much trees on it. At that point, everything had been cut down so much.
He was there when there was a plague, when the whole city was evacuated, but he didn't want to move.
He was there when there was a plague, and tigers, wild, huge tigers were
walking the streets.
We're walking the streets of Tiruvannamalai. That's right.
Yes.
That's right. And he was there when tigers, and he was not afraid. No. And apparently the story was that this huge tiger would come and sit with him during the daytime. I mean, a gigantic tiger. he had this connection with animals. He could communicate with animals. So I'm just in awe of the guy. I really, I've said this to you before, probably numerous times, that I can't imagine what my life would have been like had I not learned from his example. He's my main role model in my life. He's my main teacher. Like I said, this book, Be As You Are, The Teachings of Sri Ramana Maharshi, took me 5.5 years to read it. I couldn't understand what he was talking about. Sumairu, just be quiet. And he said his main teaching was self-inquiry.
Or Atma Vichara.
Atma Vichara. So, can you explain a little bit of self-inquiry?
So the word Atma Vichara in Tamil means, the word Vichara means investigation or inquiry. So, and like a typical investigation happens, you slowly start digging for facts. You slowly start uncovering the ground. It's like you dig for the truth. You investigate.
So Atma means?
And Atma means soul, or in this case, the universal soul. Or it could be, maybe for an enlightened person, it means the universal soul, but for most of us, it is the soul which we think is in our body. So Atma Vichara put together is, you try to investigate what this Atma or this soul actually is. It is not made of, it is not made in. No, you just try to investigate what is it. That's all.
And his observation was you observe it. You don't analyze it.
You try to answer the question, but the
question being, who am I?
The question being, who am I? But you observe what answers come in. You do not try to intellectually conceptualize these answers.
But the habit of the mind in your education will be concepts, intellectual analysis will come up.
And I'm American, okay, what is an Indian? And then okay, you're going down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
You take a step back.
So you take a step back and you observe.
Yes.
Who am I? And he also gave other techniques. Well, along this, in the same family of the inquiry, wait, Atma Vichara, is that Tamil?
Yeah, so that's Sanskrit.
It's Sanskrit, okay. But, so, you can also ask questions. If you notice that there's a lot of thoughts in your mind, a lot of mental activity going on, you can ask yourself, where are these thoughts coming from? Or to whom are these thoughts coming from? And that leads to, who am I? It comes to me, who am I? Or where are these thoughts coming from? Tracing the thoughts from where they are emerging from.
Tracing the origin. And
going back to the source. of where, and the source is your Atma. Beyond intellectualization, beyond analysis, beyond conceptual reality. It's who you are, this sense of beingness, you know? So, yeah, it's really... So, I couldn't understand that. I was reading the story, the things in the book, and, I mean, just glancing at this, you couldn't...
And he continuously, for example, he says, pursue the inquiry, who am I, relentlessly. Analyze your entire personality. Try to find out where the I thought begins. Go on with your meditation. Keep training your attention within. And one day the wheel of thought would slow down and an intuition will mysteriously arise. Follow the intuition, let your thinking stop, and it will eventually lead you to the goal.
Yeah. Yes, how to do that. It's basically explaining to a fish about water. And he was explaining to us about what we're surrounded in and what our real reality is. And not as a concept and not as a religious thing, but as a universal thing. And for example, someone mentioned to him and asked him a question. They said, Ramana Bhagavan, I see you doing things. How can you say that you never perform actions? And so Ramana Maharshi answered, the radio sings and speaks, but if you open it, you will find no one inside. Similarly, my existence is like the space. Though this body speaks like the radio, there is no one inside as a doer. I mean, I put a couple question marks around this and lots of little stars. I was like, but what? What? I mean, but I knew what he was describing was so hugely important. You can understand. I mean,
just to throw a little bit more light, I mean, Western science is also trying to understand the same thing lately. For example, the holographic theory and all those theories.
Holographic universe.
Holographic universe.
Yeah.
Which tries to talk about the holographic theory as well, like the quantum holographic theory.
Right.
They say that there are two types of paradigms. One is the human body acting like a television, which picks up signals from... So without the signal, the television is basically nothing. Or the second one, the human body being a generator, which produces its own electricity. Now, most of Eastern philosophy or Eastern spirituality is based on the paradigm that we are essentially television sets, which is exactly what Marcelo just mentioned in Ramana Maharshi's quote, where you're just the body, but there's no one inside the body once you realize that you're not just the body alone.
Yeah. So when I finished grad school, I put this... When I was in graduate school for psychotherapy, marriage and family therapy, I put this book aside, but I'll glance at it once in a while. That was 2 long years. But when I finished school, I went back to the book. I was reading it again. I couldn't understand it, even though by that time I'd been meditating for 5 years, let's say, and have my own personal experiences with the meditation, going into deeper levels of awareness and cutting through the mental stuff. I mean, Ramana Maharshi said, what is the mind? It's just a bundle of thoughts. Compare that explanation, compare that to what modern psychology would say the mind is. And modern psychology, which doesn't really know what the mind is. Here you have the words of an enlightened person. So I couldn't understand Ramana's teachings still, but I knew they were so profound. And I decided when I was finished with grad school and I was sort of floundering around, because it was a recession where I was living, and there weren't many jobs, and I had some money saved up. And my friend gave me a good little push. He said, you've got enough money saved up. Hey, just go to India. So I said, okay, that's it. And I went I flew to Chennai. I got to Chennai, and my plan was an open-ended plan to stay in India, and I was going from Chennai to Tiruvannamalai, and I get to Tiruvannamalai, and I felt like I was on holy ground. I was so grateful, and I just stayed away from the Westerners. An inner voice said, stay away from the Westerners. because they were trying to understand Ramana's teachings conceptually, like I was, and I knew that would just lead to pure confusion. So I stayed with the Tamil people, and it was the best thing I ever did, and hardly anyone spoke English. And I just would go to the ashram, I would walk around the mountain, I would climb the mountain. I climbed the mountain that's at like 800, 900 meters tall, climbed it in southern Indian heat, which was really tough, and getting amoebic dysentery or so and being sick at times. But I still climbed the mountain. We had to climb up with like 2 liters of water or more. And, but I was just consuming the books from the ashram that I didn't have access to anywhere else. And I was just reading and reading and meditating and reading and having these crazy experiences and meditating in caves. And then I started understanding what the teaching was. It was so simple. My complicated Western educated mind could not grasp it, could not parse it, could not deconstruct it, could not analyze it, could not take it apart. My Western educated, complicated, intelligent mind was making the whole process very difficult for me. And so it was very, very simple what he was pointing out. Very simple. When I finally understood it. And so profound.
So how do you think it changed the way you approached practical life after you went through this stage where you realized what he was actually referring to?
It affected me in such a profound way, where using the metaphor of swimming in a river, of just floating and going with the flow of the river. Whereas before I was trying to swim upstream, before I was trying to swim across the river, I was going against the current, I was being sucked under, I was making, the mind was making it tough and difficult. And so I had, in practical terms, I had this deeper appreciation of life as a flow, just float in the flow of life. Just going with the flow and having this deeper sense of trust that everything happens perfectly in there. So that happened quite subtly, and realizing that there are greater forces at work in this existence of ours, and that if you just step out of your own way in terms of not listening to the ego, but listening more to your deeper self, this natural deeper wisdom that you have, that everyone has in abundance. It's just a matter of stepping out of one's own way. That once you do that with a sense of trust, this beautiful life just starts emerging around you. Like what Jesus was talking about. Observe the lilies. How did he say it?
I don't know.
He said, consider the lilies in the field. He said, consider the lilies in the field. And he means really look at nature. Really be in nature. Really feel your inner nature. Really feel your inner aliveness. So that was how I took it, That was how I took it. And it changed me tremendously. Yeah. But what about you? How did it start taking root within you? How did it start manifesting?
I think the most important manifestation was in how I approached people. Like, my people skills improved extraordinarily because I did not want to push an opinion, or even subconsciously we do all have our views, our concepts. So I was just myself, knowing the fact that some people would agree with me, some people might not agree with me, but that's life. And just going with the flow and trying to appreciate things as they are and accepting it. This whole, and I think that is kind of similar to your swimming upstream analogy. This whole the society wants you to hold on to things. Society wants you to fight for things, and it is such a hard thing. Not because like life is supposed to be easy, but because there are some things which you just have to let go for you to move on in life. And I think those are the two most important things. How do we interact with people, and the sheer pleasure of knowing how to let go of things when they're
Yeah.
supposed to be let go
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
because they were never yours.
Yeah, and I got a deeper appreciation of the perfection of life in a practical way. Not as a theory, not as a concept. I got a really deep appreciation of that. And I remember one time when I was in Rishikesh, this was like 2007? No, 2000... No, it's like 2004. And I met this French guy, and he was in a wheelchair. And I had just met him, but I felt this deep connection with him. His name was Jean Michel, and we were having lunch. And one day outside, and one day I said to him, "Wow, I really look back at my life, and I feel like everything has happened." And I was about to say perfectly, and he filled it up. He said perfectly. He stopped me, and he said the word perfectly, and he said that he looked at his paralysis as a benediction. And I said, "Wow, what do you mean?" And so I asked him the story of what happened, and he was taking a lot of drugs. He was partying like crazy, and he was driving a car high on different types of drugs, and he crashed and went into a coma and became paralyzed after that. But after that, he had a deeper sense of what his purpose in life was. And he had an extraordinary life, and he still has an extraordinary life. He lives up in the mountains in Himachal Pradesh.
So he and you said is he a friend of yours who married an Indian woman?
Yeah, a beautiful Indian woman, and he lives up there in the Himalayas, and he's such a special guy, and but I was so impressed with that he could see that too. And so that deeper sense of just trust life, go with the flow, and realize there's like magic. Just realize there's magic, and just go with the flow of magic. You know, just trust life. That was a huge teaching of Ramana Maharshi, and there's so much more to say about Ramana Maharshi. But I just want to say another thing about him that was so impressive. I mean, there's millions of things impressive about him. So many examples of what he was like. And for anyone listening to this who gets inspired by this conversation, there's a couple books that are recommended that we've already mentioned. A Search in Secret India by Paul Brunton, Brunton, published in 1935, I think. And it's available as a free PDF on the internet. You can Google it. And the second book, Be As You Are, The Teachings of Sri Ramana Maharshi, edited by David Godman. Or you can see videos done by David Godman just on YouTube.
If you just search for David Godman, then you can...
Godman. And his stories are incredible, and how he came upon Ramana Maharshi. And he was an Oxford graduate, and a very intelligent guy. And so... But there's a story about Ramana that for me was very important. It was so many teachings, but this one was really struck home with me. And it was where he was describing, hanging out, and Ramana Maharshi was describing how you can say Aham Brahmasmi. And what does that mean?
Aham Brahmasmi. So the word Brahman is a label, of course, because we cannot. Or let me trace back.
It's God. It's I am Brahma. It means I am Brahma.
No, Brahma. So Brahma is one of the gods.
Right.
Like Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu are the three gods.
Right.
But Brahman is not Brahma.
Right.
Brahman is what the Buddhists they call the void or the Zen. So Brahman encompasses even Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu.
I am the reality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in essence, it's like I am everything. So,
I am everything.
So I'm Aham Brahmasmi means I am everything.
So Ramana Maharshi was telling a group of people, Indians, that a spiritual practice is you can say to yourself, Aham Brahmasmi. And these Hindu priests who were there, they got really upset. You know this story?
No.
They got really upset with him. They said to him, Bhagavan, you can say that, but no one else can say such a thing. No one else can say such a thing. And they stormed out of the room. Okay?
Yeah, maybe they were from a very conservative sect.
Well, there's some priests,
Yeah,
Hindu priests who
yeah.
were very conservative.
Yeah,
You know, think
yeah,
about in
yeah.
those times as well.
Yeah.
And so Ramana Maharshi repeated after those Brahmin priests, you know, then the Brahmin priests, just so you understand the context, they're like the intellectuals of the intellectuals in the ancient Indian traditions. The brainiacs, you know, super brilliant. They remembered so many verses. Yeah, really amazing.
So they are usually used as the part of the society which is used to propagate knowledge across.
Yes. They
society.
maintained the knowledge from thousands of years in a perfectly, almost perfectly preserved state.
And just to give a context, so a priest in Eastern philosophy is not someone who interprets God's message, because we don't. Our definition of God is not someone who is external. He's just God internally. They are the ones who define or try to tell you what was written in this book, in this date, and blah blah and so on.
I did not know that. So thanks for that. Yeah. So these priests, these Hindu priests, they storm out of the room. They're upset, you know, that he said a spiritual practice, you can say Aham Brahmasmi, and that is a spiritual practice. And so after they left the room, Ramana Maharshi repeated what to the other people. He said, it is a spiritual practice. You can say to yourself, Aham Brahmasmi. You are everything. You are the totality. You're the reality. And I just loved that. I thought that was so profound. It's like, and so that's something I repeat to myself quite often. Aham Brahmasmi. And just but now I know it a little bit better since you explained it.
It's everything.
Yeah, it's everything.
It's everything.
It's everything. So.
And nothing.
And nothing. Which is exactly the same teachings as the Buddha.
Yeah. Or any of the major spiritual.
Of course, Jesus too. You know, that's what the core of all the religions is, the mystical core. They're all pointing at the same thing. And that's why the Sufis in Islam, for example, some Sufi saints who realize this thing, and they started saying Anal Haq, which means I am God, or which means I am the reality. And these guys, what they were saying was considered blasphemous by Islam, and they were stoned to death. They were killed. They were not just stoned or killed in the normal way. Some of them were torn apart. Each limb was tied to a horse, and the horses were made to go in separate directions, torn apart, these guys. And these guys, when they were dying, they were like laughing. Incredible.
Because they know that they're not the body.
They knew they had transcended the body. Yeah. So these examples from Ramana Maharshi were, I mean, his teachings. He gave different teachings to different people. Muslims came to see him, atheists came to see him. I imagine Westerners, skeptical Westerners, and he gave them the teachings that fit for them. So if someone was devotional, he said, yes, keep up with that, keep doing that. If someone was more of an intellectual bent, which people who study Buddhism tend to be, for example, he would say, yes, keep with that, or keep with meditation. He just had a universality to him.
So it was, and it goes back to an age-old theory that there is no one way to approach Godhood or Brahman or Zen, or however you want to label it. You can approach it in many ways. You can approach it by meditation. You can approach it intellectually like Buddhism. You can also approach it devotionally like Hinduism does. All if done in the proper way, of course. With having an ego at the start, but then realizing at the end of the practice that there is no ego.
Yeah. And Ramana Maharshi, he gave some examples of this spiritual quest, of transcending and all the efforts, because what happens in the spiritual journey, some people really decide, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to gain enlightenment, and they go full board with it, and they meditate 10 hours a day, and they're hardcore, or they meditate even more than that, and they become very rigid, very sort of mechanically rigid in their and the spiritual ego is much worse than the regular ego. Like my path is better than your path. my teaching, my meditation technique is better than your,
Like
my guru is better
jnana,
than your guru.
Like jnana is better than bhakti, or bhakti is better than jnana. Nothing is better than nothing else.
Or Hinduism is better than Christianity, or
Yeah.
Islam is better than Christianity, or, you know, it just this whole turf thing, and the spiritual ego going crazy with it. So Ramana Maharshi said, when your struggles is like a man who's standing in a freshwater lake up to his neck in water, and he's screaming out, "I'm so thirsty! I'm so thirsty!" when he doesn't realize that he's surrounded by water, that he's even up to his neck in water. So, yeah, there you go. How's that? I mean, I felt that was very true, but I couldn't feel that in my life, you know, until I broke through. Yeah. Also, with Ramana Maharshi, he was very close with the animals, as we mentioned before, and he could communicate with the animals. You know, are there any examples?
There were like all these animals which always stayed in the ashram, like the cow Lakshmi, and then there were like all the rhesus monkeys, who are one of the most, I would say, unsettled monkey species.
Crazy monkeys.
All of them living there in perfect harmony. Peacocks, the national bird of India, of course, and one of the vahanas of one of the local gods there, so which was kind of symbolic of the whole place, like a god called Lord Murugan. So Murugan is the Lord Murugan, or God, is supposed to manifest himself as a peacock, and the fact that a peacock always lived in the ashram was seen as a really good omen by the local people as well.
Interesting. You mentioned peacock. I just remembered this story that I just read a couple days ago. It was where there was a hunter who was about to kill a peacock in Arunachala, and Ramana Maharshi tried to stop the hunter, said, "Please don't do that." And the hunter said, "Swami, get out of here." Rudely said, "Leave me alone, Swami. Like, this is not for you. Let me do what I'm a hunter. This is what I do, and we need the food." And so soon afterwards, that hunter got in an accident, and one of his arms had to be amputated. And Ramana Maharshi said later, that's how it is. You know, if you don't abide, if you don't listen to the lessons that you have in front of your face, then the karma is going to hit you big time. Otherwise people won't learn. You know, so this resistance that happens quite often, that we know about, and the key thing is to not resist, to just say, okay, I need to learn a lesson here. What could the lesson be? And for all of us, the lesson is our egos and how our egos sabotage us, and to stop resisting, say, okay, I accept it, and this is a difficult situation. I'm gonna accept it, and try your best to get out of it, but try to be humble, cultivate humbleness in it. Yeah.
There's nothing or no one else who is more superior anyway, so...
Yeah, Ramana Maharshi said there's no difference between you and me. And the Buddha said the same thing. And Jesus was saying the same thing. You know, the Buddha said, everyone is a Buddha, meaning an enlightened being. But they don't realize it yet, but everyone is. And Jesus, he said, I'm not Christian, I was not born Christian, I was not raised Christian, but from what I saw...
Is that what Jesus said? Or?
Huh? He didn't say that. Actually, he was a Jew, so he wasn't never even a Christian.
That is true.
But he was like, you will perform greater miracles than I have done in the, he said, in the future. So he's meaning that everyone is a divine being, you know. But in standard Christianity, that would come across as blasphemy, I would imagine.
Yeah.
You know. So what the essence of Ramana Maharshi's teachings were that see through the veil of illusion of the egos. Realize that your ego has imprisoned you. You're in a prison of your mind. Just like the movie The Matrix, that the prison made for the mind, which that's what he was describing. And his teachings, which this is why it was so difficult for me to understand, his teachings were about realizing that you're in a prison. You're the warden, you made your own prison, and realize that the prison doesn't even exist.
Yeah, and there is a really brilliant quote of his where he says, "The cause of your misery is not in the life without, it is in you as the ego. You impose limitations on yourself and then make a vain struggle to transcend them. All unhappiness is due to the ego."
He also said on the same note, your mind is the cause of all your suffering. I mean, compare that to modern psychology and psychiatry, or psychoanalysis, which is even worse in terms of how people will be in psychoanalysis for 5-10 years,
Wow.
Oh yeah, that's how it is, lying down on. So he said, your mind is the cause of all your suffering. And so I was reading this and I was like, yeah, that really resonates, but what does he mean? I could not understand it. So it wasn't until I had my own deeper personal experiences with it that I was able to understand, finally, Ramana Maharshi's teachings. And like I said, they're very simple. And I feel that watching those videos by David Godman on his YouTube channel, just put in the search box, David Godman. And it's ironic that his name is Godman, Godman. So, but anyways, just watch if you're interested in this, because Ramana's teachings are for everyone, but not everyone could actually understand it. Actually, he said
some other teachers who.
Yeah, and he said for example, there was a story of a German guy, a philosophy professor, who came to see him, and he said, the philosopher said to Ramana, "I've come from a great distance, and I want to learn from you." And Ramana Maharshi said to him, "Well, this is a place where you come to unlearn everything that you've learned, And I want to finish up with a couple of stories that I recently heard about Ramana Maharshi, that just to explain what the guy was like in a simple way. There was a story about a guy named U.G. Krishnamurti. Have you heard of U.G. Krishnamurti?
No.
Okay. U.G. Krishnamurti he's well regarded as a sage in India, modern India. And U.G. Krishnamurti spent like 5 or 6 years studying yoga with Shivananda, Shivananda was in Rishikesh, was one of the main guys who brought the secret teachings of yoga. He brought it. He wrote books about it because he thought the world needed to learn about it. He thought it shouldn't be secret. People need to learn about yoga, and hence he's one of the founders of modern yoga, and that's why Rishikesh is so famous with yoga now. So U.G. Krishnamurti spent like 5-6 years with Shivananda. Felt like he didn't learn anything, moved on, and he went and stayed with Krishnamurti, and Jiddu Krishnamurti, who's if you can YouTube Krishnamurti also and listen to Krishnamurti speaking. He's Krishnamurti. His message is very clear for the Western intellectual mind. He was educated at the best universities in London, in England. He was being groomed as the world savior, by the Theosophical Society. And when he was in his early 20s, he said, "It's not me." Just like Neo said to the Oracle, "I'm not the one." Krishnamurti said, "I'm not the one." And he backed out of this whole thing. And he was really respected because he stood up and did the right thing. But he gave these lectures that were so profound, analyzing what is the situation with modern man and the disconnect and the pain that modern people are enduring and suffering from. So U.G. Krishnamurti spent like 5 or 6 or 7 years with Jiddu Krishnamurti, and he started parroting him. And then he leaves Krishnamurti feeling that he didn't learn much from him. And so he hears about Ramana Maharshi, and U.G. Krishnamurti goes and wants to spend years with Ramana Maharshi. So he can imagine from the stories that he hears about. Have you heard this story? No, you haven't at all? Okay. No. So he hears about Ramana Maharshi, what a great saint he is, and he imagines this guy must be radiating waves of visible peace. Like you could like when you look at a fire on a hot day and you see this the air moving, or the mirage in the distance, and you see the heat waves. Yeah, the heat waves of a sort. He felt like Ramana Maharshi was at that caliber of incredibleness, such a rare phenomena, the Buddha of the 20th century. So he goes with these aspirations and expectations of wanting to live with Ramana Maharshi and to learn from him and to really absorb his teachings, his essence. So Yuji Krishnamurti finally gets to the ashram, and he is looking for Ramana Maharshi. He asks, where's the Maharshi? And they tell him he's in the kitchen. And he gets to the kitchen, and there's Ramana Maharshi sitting on the floor cutting vegetables.
Yeah, I've heard the story.
Okay, I think I told it to you. Yeah, okay, that's why I asked you. I thought I had told you. So Yuji Krishnamurti can't believe it. The Buddha of the 20th century sitting on the floor cutting vegetables? No way. Such an enlightened man such a Buddha would not be sitting on the floor cutting vegetables. So he's really disappointed. But he still stays around because he's heard so much about the Maharshi. And so the next thing he sees, like later on the day or a couple days later, he sees Ramana Maharshi sitting on this sofa where he always sat in the meditation hall. You know this part of the story?
Yeah.
Okay. So he sees Ramana Maharshi, and Yuji Krishnamurti just can't believe it, because Ramana Maharshi, this great saint, he's sitting on the sofa looking at a comic book and laughing. he's like, what? A Buddha of the 20th century sitting on the sofa looking at a comic book and laughing? What? No way. And then the next thing that happened just shocked Yuji Krishnamurti. He sees this man approach Ramana Maharshi with deep sincerity, with a deep sense of how would you say it? Like
reverence.
Yes. Reverence, because this man approaches Ramana Maharshi, who's sitting on the couch looking at the comic books and laughing. He approaches Ramana Maharshi with this deep reverence, and he tells Ramana Maharshi, I've studied so much, and I've really am looking for God, to understand God. I really want to find out about God, and can you tell me about God? And Ramana Maharshi, looks at the man, and he starts laughing, and he gives him the comic book. And Yuji Krishnamurti sees this, and he's outraged. And he sees Ramana Maharshi giving this guy the comic book and laughing. And Yuji Krishnamurti, he missed. He missed. He left the ashram right away. And for the rest of his life, he was just parroting Krishnamurti, and it was just parroting stuff. His stuff was not, it didn't go deep, because people were able to provoke him really easily and get him really pissed off. So, but anyways, Yuji Krishnamurti left, and he said, oh, I went to Ramana Maharshi and it was nothing special. So he really didn't miss, But anyways, so this is our conversation with about Ramana Maharshi. I hope that you got something out of it, that you got inspired by it, that you think we're not just a bunch of two loonies who are like obsessed with this one guy, but we really feel that he provided a very profound and simple universal teaching, and at full strength, and that it's available to every single person, regardless of their religion, regardless of if they're an atheist, regardless of their intellectual capacities. He would even say that a simpler person with no education would have an easier time understanding these teachings. And unfortunately, I would agree, coming from my perspective. Any closing words, Prabhu, about this, Ramana?
Yep, I just hope that we kind of piqued your curiosity and interest to read a little bit more, because words fail to describe or explain the phenomenon that he was, and only silence can explain precisely what he either meant or wanted to mean.
And you just reminded me, and I just remembered, also for anyone interested, these books are available. They're both available as free PDFs. A Search in Secret India and Be As You Are, the Teachings of Sri Ramana Maharshi. But you can also see on YouTube a couple videos about documentaries about Ramana Maharshi, where you can see these videos of him walking around in the mountain, and you see he just has a loincloth, he only had a walking stick, he had no shoes, he was treated everyone with utmost respect.
Utterly simple.
Utterly simple, humble. And this is who Gandhi, when he saw his photo, just all emotionally said, what a great sage. So the two documentaries that I recommend that you can see, they're not at the highest quality, but you can see them and be inspired by them. The first one is called Abide as the Self. Abide as the Self. The teachings of Sri Ramana Maharshi. And the other one is called The Sage of Arunachala. Arunachala is Arunachala. The Sage of Arunachala. So we hope that this inspires you to explore his teachings and to pursue it. And please feel free to contact us at the Crooked Pass if you have any questions about Ramana Maharshi's teachings and you want to get some insights, if we're able to help. Okay? Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste, namaste. And have a wonderful, glorious day, rest of the week, and life. Bye.
Bye.